Yeah, you're following Turkey closely, um, and as well as other emerging markets, right, in your position.
Right, correct.
And you've been
I also
IHS,
cover
how
Croatia,
long,
Slovenia, and Central Asia.
right, how long have you been at IHS for?
A little under 25 years.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah,
And you're based in Washington, D.C.?
indeed, yes.
Yeah, yeah. I know you're a bit of an expert in emerging markets, and there's a lot of people out there, but there are not so many people who don't have a vested interest on the sell side or the buy side. And I know that that you guys take an impartial, objective view to what's going on around the world, and so we thought it'd be really good to have your opinion.
Sure.
What was your initial reaction? I mean, I think everyone's pretty much aware that the central bank chief was changed late on Friday night by Erdogan, which perhaps came as a surprise to some. I mean, how about yourself? What did you think initially?
So initially, as far as the timing, it's not a surprise that he would replace the central bank governor, right? This is a well-known fact that he's this, this has been reported, the fourth central bank governor since 2019. And in fact, I actually was, to our clients, I was writing to be cautious of the overexuberance after the appointment of Akbal.
Right.
Because while, yes, Akbal was a more or less trusted technocrat, it just demonstrated the fact that this was still Erdogan's control. That he was put in early again, and he could be replaced.
Right.
Now, what is very surprising is the timing of it, of course. Because of the public proclamations, he continued to publicly commit to tight monetary policy and even put timeframes on it, saying this year in 2021 we would be relaxing monetary policy. And it just was unfathomable to me that he would be doing this without some sort of tacit agreement from Erdogan. I mean, Erdogan just appointed him 3 or 4 months earlier. He had to have known what Akbal was going to do. So the fact that he would make this move so quickly was surprising to us.
Right. Yeah.
Especially, I mean, when you look at some of the other factors, inflation was still rising indeed, but we were projecting that it was going to be topping out in either March or April. The negative impact on domestic economic growth was not severe yet. When you looked at very leading confidence indices, they were all still positive. Our own IHS PMI was still positive. It had dipped a little bit, but it was still indicating growth. So it just, again, the timing seems very strange, especially when you consider that the banks are going into, a time where their syndicated loans are going to need to be rolled over in April and May to foster this kind of market turmoil ahead of that is problematic.
Yeah, I wonder what was going through his mind.
We've had lots of discussions about that within the analysts that cover Turkey. It's trying to gauge what possibly is motivating this, and it's hard to come up with a justification. Yeah,
there have been some theories, and I think Mr. Babajan, the ex-economy minister, came on the news and saying that perhaps Akbal was looking into the central bank's foreign currency reserves and the depletion and where they went.
Right.
But again, like you say, he promised to keep rates high for the whole year. Perhaps, I know some of Erdogan's advisors were talking to him and saying, hey, look what's going on. I mean, companies can't, company loans are more than 20% per annum. They run on variable rates of interest, right? And perhaps Erdogan suddenly, had cold feet. I don't know.
Right. And that's actually one of the theories that we've discussed is, when you look at the state's activity within the banking sector, we've seen a significant increase of state ownership of total assets in the banking sector over the past few years because of state-directed lending. And while, of course, the market instability doesn't help the banks. There is a theory that maybe these high interest rates were putting the pinch on the banking sector, and that those bankers were saying, listen, we're going to have a rash of non-performing loans if these interest rates stay this high.
Yeah.
He's trying to avoid maybe that a surge of non-performing loans eventually coming due later in the year, which was one of our larger concerns.
Yeah.
Just a week ago, that these non-performing loans, that the asset qualities would deteriorate later in this year and into 2022.
Yeah, sure. And then, of course, he had his advisors come on TV, on several TV channels earlier in the week, talking about what all this meant, and that there was nothing to worry about, and that the lira wasn't falling because of the change in the governor. I mean, that in itself perhaps shows, where he's leaning in terms of economic policy going forward. Were you a bit perplexed by that, or would you say that it would be expected following such a decision that he would get those advisors, those unorthodox advisors, to speak publicly?
Yeah, it's interesting because they have to do this dance. They have to avoid a complete collapse of the lira, and then that's what in advance of just last week we published an article saying that they're going to maintain stable economic monetary policies because of what happened in February, after they decided not to raise the interest rates, which was actually somewhat defensible at the February meeting. And it did time poorly with the United States Treasury bond yields going up and attracting more capital. But the lira already destabilized just from a non-action in February. So, there is a mix that I think he needs to put out people that will stabilize the lira. And we saw that with the new central bank governor saying, at very minimum, that they wouldn't they wouldn't immediately drop interest rates before the next meeting. So at least have these interest rates for 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks now.
Yeah.
But I saw just today, I think, he said that they would be returning to kind of the mix of monetary policy, which suggests the overnight, going back to your question, the unorthodox economic policies. And I think there's a mix between stabilizing the lira, but yet playing to his base, that we're not following the Western rules of monetary policy. We are following our own rules of economic policy in general. So
what do you think he might do on April 15th?
That's a hard decision. And actually just yesterday, I was leaning towards the fact that I believed he would keep interest rates stable, at least in April.
Right.
It goes back to the fact that we are entering this rollover period for syndicated loans. And I think that stability will need to be maintained in order to not send the costs of those rollovers even higher than they've already gone just in the past week.
Right.
Now, we don't believe, clearly, we're bringing forward the expected cuts. So the current leaning that we're looking at is interest rate cuts beginning in June.
Right.
And much more severe than we previously anticipated. I think the risk is very high that the cuts could come even in April.
Right.
So, if risks are certainly higher now, but I still believe that they must understand the importance of instability and the negative impact that will have on their sovereign position.
Yeah. I mean, he had when Arbal was first appointed in November, right, and then Lutfi Elvan, they were very focused on foreign investors, but it seems that Erdogan's not mentioning foreign investment and foreign investors as much as he was, which would
In fact, he seems to be going out of his way to not mention them or to go back to his playbook of blaming them.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah. So like you say, it's really an open question what he might do. What about the lira? Obviously that sold off a lot this week and it's kind of stabilized, perhaps with some intervention from state-run banks.
So, I've seen different forecasts from the collapse to 10, if that's a collapse, to pretty stable. Right now we're looking at the lira still has room to depreciate because there's still so much uncertainty. In a baseline scenario, let's say that the interest rates are at least held stable in April.
Yeah.
Even if there is, let's say the 1 week policy rate is kept stable, but they revert to this, the overnight lending rate to reduce interest rates. In that case, we still see the interest rate, the exchange rate has room to depreciate. Probably, based on initial market reactions, we wouldn't see, right now we're looking at it still staying between 9 to 9.5 to the dollar, something on the order of what we saw, going past, I'm sorry, between 8.5 and 9.
Yeah.
Past what we saw, last year, but not falling, another 20-30%.
Right.
When you look at the initial reactions of bond yields, of the stock market and the exchange rate, the initial panic has not been as bad as it was back in 2018. I think markets have more or less priced in the inherent instability of the situation.
Yeah.
This all changes if in April there's an aggressive interest rate cut.
Yeah.
If aggressive interest rate cut, then we could see the lira falling another 20%, say around 9.5 or something to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's very foreseeable.
Yeah.
You're based in DC, right? So what's the feeling over there, both in terms of this week's decision and in terms of the economic outlook, particularly based on possible US sanctions and the Howe Bank case, etc.? What are people saying?
Well, the election of Biden has always been a problem for when you look at stability in Turkey, because of the possibility that sanctions over Halk Bank, over the missile defenses, could all escalate because Biden would not be as protective of Erdogan that President Trump had been.
Yeah.
So there was always a greater risk, I think, from the United States going into this year for Erdogan. I think this only solidifies that risk because the United States sees Erdogan increasingly as somebody that can't be trusted, maintain stable stable policies in general, that he is prone to sharp changes in the direction of policy. And it just reinforces once again, I think those of us that follow Turkey closely, we've known this for quite a long time, the monetary policy is not independent. I think a headline grabbing incident like this makes it even clearer to policymakers and makes it easier for them to discount dealing with Erdogan and Turkey. It just raises risks for sanctions and for less cooperation with Turkey.
So even if Erdogan, as he's doing at the moment, was to make overtures towards Biden, that policy may reverse later, and he may resort to norm.
Right, and Erdogan is always playing off of one another. So if he's trying to appease the United States one day, he's going to go back to Putin in a week or two and try to appease Putin. And Then you have him also playing off EU leaders. There was, looked like there was moving to a detente over the drilling rights as well. So, and that can always be reversed as well.
Yeah, I was thinking this week that the EU always used to talk about Turkey being at the crossroads of East and West, and the United States also talked about that. And now Erdogan's putting Turkey firmly at the crossroads of East and West, and muscling around in the neighborhood, and people don't like it.
Absolutely. This, if you look at, say, last year, he was growing more and more isolated. When you look October, back dating to October, and it's an interesting because he almost realized how isolated he had gotten. There was tensions with the Middle East over Libya, over Syria. The drilling rights was worsening then. October, we still didn't know that Biden was going to be president, but there was that possibility. So I think he saw that he was becoming more and more isolated, and we've seen an about face of him trying to re-engage since that point of time. And effectively, he's already engaged with Russia over Armenia, Azerbaijan, where they've come to that actually. When you look at that, they might have been adversaries, at first in that war, but then they turned out to be kind of working together and gaining power between them in that region at the expense of the West.
Yeah, I guess the same could be said of Syria, of Libya,
right?
Various places. So do you think? So people you talk to in Washington, the officials, do they see that? Do they believe that somehow Erdogan is working with Russia in the region and to keep the United States out of key areas, or do they see it as more complex?
I think it's never black and white, and it's always, of course, hard to say what they really think and then what seems to be kind of coming out from publicly. But I think the Biden administration takes a hard line with Russia. So my is that they view Turkey more as a battleground with Russia. That when you look at going forward, could it temper the sanctions that they might engage with bank, and might they try to win back Erdogan now that he's trying to re-engage? That's possible. But I certainly think Biden wants to draw a line in the sand that he's not Trump, and that he's not friendly with dictators. And that I think it's going to be hard for the United States to not have a firm stand against Erdogan, especially as he continues to act like a dictator and shows these dictatorial tendencies.
So what would you say the chances are of sanctions this year for the missiles?
I think it's probable there are sanctions. Now, how widespread those are, that I will hedge. I think it will, given the instability now that's already facing Turkey, they will probably speak that they will be a little more targeted. But I do think that they will probably be enough to maybe rethink some, military contracts, and I'm not an expert on this area. It would probably be enough to divert spending and military support that might otherwise be there. But
so you don't see economic sanctions. You don't see
probably falling short of punitive economic sanctions regarding that.
Yeah.
If anything, when we look at Hulk Bank, that's where there could be more punitive sanctions. But even that, I think will probably try to be targeted so that it's not going to add a further destabilization to the financial sector in general.
Right. And the Hulk Bank case was supposed to start.
I wish I knew. We believe that it would, it's been, I don't think it ever officially stopped.
Right.
It's still under investigation, and it's just what's the speed of how fast it goes forward, and what the prosecution and the results of it would be. So we might again see progress on that, but as far as a punitive action, at this point, it's something that Turkey doesn't need, and it's something that Europe doesn't need when you look at some of the ties between the European banks and Turkey. So that theoretically, a Biden administration would take that into concern as well.
So would you assume that they would happen this year or next year or sometime?
The Hulk Bank, I would not be as certain for. I think the defense sanctions would be more likely to come before anything from Hulk Bank.
Yeah, yeah. So what kind of, realistically speaking, looking forward, just taking things in general as far as the economy and investment is concerned, what do you think Erdogan would be willing and able to do in the coming weeks to allay investors' concerns, and to what degree might he be able to do so, considering what happened last weekend, considering the situation with the United States? I mean, have you guys looked at the possibilities there?
Frankly, I think the best thing he can do to reassure markets is allow the central bank to at least maintain its economic policies, and at most revert to a multiple interest rate approach. If they allow the central bank to at least maintain monetary policy, the main policy rate at its level, April and potentially through May, then I think we're going to see what we've seen in past crises, where the lira initially reacts very badly, and through defense of the exchange rate with reserves, which, as you alluded to earlier, is almost certainly happening, that there is a recovery period, but it won't return to pre-crisis levels, right? It always dips very sharply, recovers, but never quite to pre-crisis levels, and then it kind of resumes its downward trajectory there, waiting for the next crisis. I think that's the best thing that he can do. He can keep his son-in-law out of being appointed to a new position in the immediate future, which I've heard rumors that that's in the works. That would be a bad signal to the market.
Yeah.
So, committing to economic policies, moving beyond just the monetary policies, this the economic package that he presented a couple weeks ago now was ineffective, but at least he did make reference to wanting to try to find stability. So he keeps up economic policies that at least on the surface aim at economic stability, that would help in the coming weeks. So if we saw some progress on limiting expenditures, fiscal expenditures, that would be a positive sign. If they made progress on dealing with financial sector asset risks, that would be positive. And those are all steps that I think would help in a potential recovery.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's hope he takes those steps at least to at least keep the losses as small as possible for the lira. Like you're saying, basically that the lira's got some downside anyway, but it's about limiting that downside, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Andy, for your time.
Absolutely.
It's been talking with you again.
Okay. Well, I'll look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah. Take care.
All right.
Cheers.